So when we left off, we were talking about participant observation as a method in cultural anthropology. Okay, remember that is just what some people refer to as like structured hanging out or engaging in the local customs, practices, behaviors of the culture that you're living in, okay, to really get a feel for that culture, to really understand it. Okay, that includes wearing the local kind of garments, what they wear, doing your hair the way they do their hair, eating their food, all of these sorts of things. So it's just participating in their daily lives and then living the life of a person in that culture. Okay, and so the purpose of this is to gather data, right? That's the purpose of any research, is to gather data, and then later you can examine that data and explore the data. But when you're talking about cultural anthropology, really we're looking to gather cultural information or information about the people themselves and how they live their lives. And so we're going to do that through informants. And informants are just people that we get our information from. A lot of times, like we said, these people become friends, they become really good friends of yours, and they become more than just a participant in a study. But it's really any person that you get data from within the study community. And then we gather this data in addition to these participant observation activities, but also through interviews. Okay, those are just systematic conversations that are used to collect data. Okay, and then we also want to observe how people in the culture interact with each other. So this is going to be the term intersubjectivity. We use that term sometimes. So we're just looking at how people are interacting with each other as a way to better understand their culture. So these are the different types of interviews that we'll have or use as cultural anthropologists. And so they go from more strict to more loose. Okay. So the most strict is an interview schedule. This is asking every participant the exact same questions in the same order, the exact same way. Okay. Nothing deviates. You don't get to ask follow-up questions or things like that. It's the exact same for every single person the whole time. Okay. Very clear focus for that one, right? You know exactly what you're asking. You know exactly what answers you're trying to get, and what information you're trying to get, I should say. And then the type of notes you're going to take are you're filling out basically the form. You're filling in the blank spaces after the questions. Okay. Then you have a formal interview or structured interviews. You do have a clear goal, and so you go into the interview knowing what you're trying to accomplish. So knowing if you're trying to answer a specific question, you know that when you go in, you're working toward that question. There's a very clear focus. And so with that, you have a transcript. A lot of times that comes from just simple video or audio recording, and then you transcribe that later. Something that anthropologists do a lot of, transcription. Okay. Then you've got an informal interview or an open-ended interview. Open-ended interview, you have a focus but not necessarily a goal. So maybe you know you're asking about the person's relationship with the environment, but you don't know exactly this very specific questions you're going to ask. Okay, and so you have some questions lined up, but you can add new questions throughout. You can adjust the questions as necessary as you move through. And so you might have a clear focus, you might not. It might just be kind of open-ended, as the name would suggest, right? Kind of see where the conversation takes you. Okay. As you're doing this, because it is more of a conversation and less of a strict question-answer kind of interview, you're going to take some notes to kind of outline what you've talked about. You don't want to be sitting writing the whole time, because you're going to be missing some information that way. And it detracts from the conversational tone of the interview. Okay, so then later, after you finish the interview, you'll do a more formal write-up, a longer write-up. You'll fill in any missing gaps in the transcript or in your outline. You don't want to wait too long to do this, or you'll lose some information. Okay, then you can have next conversation or casual conversation. This is just basically the kind of conversation your mom has when you come back from break over the summer, over Christmas, and you know she's got a point, but she's trying to have a normal conversation with you, but she throws in very planned questions like, oh, do you have a girlfriend? Right? Instead of letting that come out in the conversation. Okay, so it appears as a normal conversation. You might have some specific questions thrown in. there's not necessarily clear focus, right? Your mom is trying to figure out what's going on in your life or trying to reconnect with you maybe, but it's not a super clear focus like you have with the interview schedule or a very formal interview, okay? You might be jotting down some notes, and then when you're finished, you're going to go and really recreate that conversation, write down a lot of notes later. The reason you're not writing down notes again during the conversation is just because it detracts from a normal conversation. If you're sitting there at the beginning of class trying to talk to someone and they're taking notes, it's very distracting, and it doesn't feel like a very natural conversation. Okay, and then participant observation, this is again that hanging out. Okay, this is spending time with the informant in their daily life, and you're not sitting there with poking questions. You're not doing that. You're just engaging. Maybe you're cooking dinner, or maybe you're planning a festival, or maybe you're at a church ceremony, and you're just engaging with those people like you would anyone else. Okay? So with this form of interview or data collection method, you're going to be having what are called head notes. These are just notes in your head. It's very straightforward, not a complicated term. So head notes, just ideas you're keeping in your head. You're going to be jotting some down, maybe a little bit if there's something you really need to keep track of. And then later you'll write up that full description again. Those are the 4 different types, going from most strict to most loose. Okay. And so when you're coming up with questions, where do good questions come from? How do we, as anthropologists, come up with questions? Okay, so in the 1900s, there was a publication that talked about standardized research questions. Okay, and these standardized guides were used very heavily, but as anthropology kind of broadened and started engaging in different types of methods, these became less and less useful. Okay, and so usually you have a specific question in mind going in, and that's usually going to be based on your theoretical background and your research focus. Okay, but it's important to keep in mind, like we said, that while we do have these kind of structured methods or behaviors in cultural anthropology when we're conducting research, it's also meant to be very fluid. Okay, so questions might change. So as you go into community, you might learn something new that then changes your entire perspective and thus your questions. Okay, and then you would have to adjust accordingly. Okay, and so really what the goal is to get people talking. Okay, the more you're talking with people, the more of a conversation there is, the more rapport you're going to build, the better relationship you're going to have. And so the more the talking, that is our information. So people communicating with you, that's our data that we collect as scientists. And so the more of that you have, the better off you're going to be. Okay, so keeping people talking, getting people talking, but in a very natural way. And so when we talked about the different types of interviews, there's different types of notes. So you have field notes and head notes. Field notes, that's just any information that the anthropologist writes down or transcribes during fieldwork. Okay, and there you've got Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson taking some field notes there. Okay, so this is anything you're writing down or transcribing during your fieldwork. Okay, you have to do this. So you can't really participate. You can participate in anthropological methods, but you're not going to learn anything or discover anything if you don't take this step of writing things down. Because then you're relying wholly on your memory for every detail, every conversation, every sight, smell, texture, belief, behavior that you observe. And so you're going to be missing a lot. Okay? And sometimes, as we talked about, anthropological fieldwork can last a long time. I mean, a year on average, but a lot of times people are taking 10, like there's some people who have been in the field for 3-5 years. And so you're going to lose a lot of information. Those first notes that you had at the beginning are going to be lost. Try to imagine writing down and recording everything that's happened to you in the last 3 years. That's almost impossible to do from memory. So you want to have these field notes. Head notes, then on the other hand, are the mental notes that you make while on the field. Okay, so these may or may not end up in your actual field notes. So you don't have to write down every single thing, right? You do have to make a judgment call about what's important and what isn't. And so not all of your head notes always end up in your field notes. Okay, but when you're participating in conversation or doing participant observation, you don't, like we said, want to be taking notes all the time. So you utilize head notes as a way to remember things without having to write things down all the time.